What's up? What's up? How's it going, everyone? My name is Danny Quest. I'm a journalist, activist, researcher who specializes in deep state geopolitics, multi state intelligence operations, and the Anglo American neocon Zionist power structure. You can find my work on multiple websites from Mint Press News, Waking Times, The Fifth Column, freedomcells.org, and the Conscious Resistance Network. I'm also a co-founder of the Truther.us, America's most honest news company, and chairman of I Am the Face of Truth, Faces for 9/11 Truth campaign. You can get your banner today. This is my presentation on false flag terrorism. Leaders throughout history have acknowledged the use of false flags to justify their political agendas. Terrorism is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people harder than the fear of sudden death, said Adolf Hitler. Part 1. What is false flag terror? Originally, a false flag was not really a covert or deep state operation like it is commonly depicted today. Historically speaking, the term false flag is really what its name states: to fly a false flag or to pretend to be something other than what you are. The word was first used to describe a tactic in the age of naval warfare where there were multiple reasons to have additional flags on your ship. Non-military merchant ships would routinely fly the flag of whichever region they were in at the time, as nature clearly shows us that sticking out can be a very dangerous thing. While the term false flag, as we have come to know it, has its origins in the sailing age, the concept, that is the idea to accomplish one's goals, it may be at the advantages to use deceit, can be traced back to the earliest times. In The Art of War, written in the 6th century BC, Sun Jiao said, "All warfare is based upon deception." When I say, what is a false flag? I know that seems basic, but honestly I'm surprised at just how little people in this community know about false flags. This might seem very unimportant, but it's very, very important prerequisite information. You can't begin to understand that Manchester was a false flag until you learn where these concepts come from and how they have been used to accomplish geopolitical goals throughout all of history. The Trojan horse, for example, was not a false flag in the naval sense, but it was an act of military and intelligence deception, the distinction of which has watered down the definition, in my opinion, and now it seems that everything under the sun can be considered a false flag. It's possible now, in my opinion, that this area of understanding is so new to the common consciousness that people haven't really developed the collective words to describe to each other yet. And I find that we get more caught up in the meanings of words than in anything else. There are different types of false flags attacks, and it is important that people learn the different types of ways the same tactic has been used over and over and over again, and it always works. One of the more common false flag tactics that is a favorite of the imperialists and governments looking to expand is to attack yourself disguised as a usually weaker enemy to justify you going in and blowing the shit out of them. This has been used by many Western elite establishments throughout the whole of history, from Rome to Great Britain to America, Hitler to Israel. Governments looking to expand upon their borders have long known the proper way to motivate their citizens to go to war. This is why Nero danced while Rome burned, why Hitler burned down the Reichstag building, or why the Irgun bombed the King David Hotel. This is how the underwear bomber was used by Michael Chertoff to sell X-ray body scanners to thousands of airports internationally. Another type of false flag is to attack your enemy's enemy dressed as your enemy and starting a war that benefits you without any of the losses of you actually fighting. This is what 9/11 was. By way of deception, thou shalt do war, is the official credo of the Israeli Mossad, adapted from the old Hebrew translation of Proverbs 24:6. For by wise counsel thou shalt make war, and it continues, thou shalt get rich by war. A third, seldom talked about type of false flag is the political assassination. This is where agents disguise themselves as their political rivals, thieves, or in special cases even crazed homicidal maniacs, a la Kathy Lee Giffords. They are what's commonly referred to as MK Ultra, named after the CIA's mind control experiments, where they admitted on record they were trying to make assassins that could commit murder and not even remember it. The latest incarnation of a false flag is false flag terrorism. To really understand false flag terrorism, we have to get into really what is the psychological benefit of using terror, specifically when it comes to the idea of ruling by terror. In 1513, Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved. The elite have long known that a nation afraid is much easier to control. Often, people like me who research how these systems work will cite what is known as the Hegelian dialectic, that is problem, reaction, solution. You can Google it. There's lots of videos and explanations, but to me, it's much easier than that. If you can control people's emotions, you can control what they're thinking about. And if you can control what they're thinking about, and by manipulating this groupthink emotional zone, the elites have been able to corral humans like chattel. And we are one very valuable herd when motivated by self-preservation. For recent examples, look at the industrial boom of productivity and the buildup of World War II, or the intelligence and technological and science boom motivated by the Cold War and the Red Scare. It's absolutely vital, if you want to know how Manchester was a false flag event, that you learn about the covert coup d'etat that took place in America just post World War II in the 1960s. This is a direct, undeniable linkage between the people closest to and who benefited most from the assassination of John F. Kennedy and those who profit from today's so-called war on terror, which I intend to reasonably show is a fabrication of the neo-colonial upper elite establishment who profits unfathomable sums of money in the name of protecting us citizens. The next type of false flag that I want to talk about is just an ordinary deception. Not all false flags have to be a bombing or a murderous event. Some are as simple as using media to project a disease, to sell vaccinations, or paying a bum to dress up like a Donald Trump supporter and starting a fight in the line. Or more recent events with the advent of the false flag industry. They can now hoax whole events using a corporate structure that have secret intelligence and blackwater operations and what would appear to be a mobile Hollywood studio complete with wardrobe, makeup, lighting, cameramen, actors and actresses, set designers, neuro-linguistic programming trained journalists, propaganda specialists, and mass media marketing agents, all in an encrypted cloud in real time. If you don't believe me, go check out CrisisCast or crisis-solutions.com and you can see how these corporations work for yourself. The false flag manufacturing firms are now available to the highest bidder. Do you need a white supremacist to take out a gay bar? Just let us know. You need a scary Muslim to yell Allah Akbar and blow up some smoke grenades and throw around some prosthetics to postpone your general election? Swing that election in your favor today. Just give us a call. If you can think of a use for false flags, crisis solutions can make it happen. A question I often get asked a lot is, I'm sure a lot of people's mind is on a lot of people's minds is, do people really get murdered in these events? And the answer is both yes and no. There is a such thing as actual terrorism. Terrorist events, crazy people from all races, religions, and walks of life are capable of inflicting harm upon large groups of people. There's also what's known as the season of sacrifice, ritualistic mass casualty events perpetrated by the sickest and highest levels of the global elite as part of a religious sacrament. I haven't really got into the mystical and occult ramifications, but I can assure you that to each of you that it is out there, and if you look, you can find it. I would recommend the work of people like Mark Passio and Michael Tsarion. Before the technology was available to virtually reconstruct these events from scratch, the purveyors of the false flag tactic of terrorism would really cause these events to happen. Research the story of Operation Gladio and what's known as the strategy of tension. With today's sophisticated multimedia technology, the orchestrators of these events prefer to keep as much under control in the event as possible. Even this does not mean that no one is killed, as accidents can always happen. Surely broken bones, scratches, bruises, concussions, and the type of injuries that you would expect if someone enacted a suicide bombing scenario in a stadium full of 30,000 people, or a small nightclub full of a few thousand people. In the dark, it's not hard to terrify them into a frenzied panic of self-preservation. This is the mental state of the supposed witnesses of these manufactured events. Some of these are what I call organic witnesses, as it helps a great deal if not all of your witnesses are paid actors. Literally every war in the American history began with the false flag terror. In the Boston Tea Party, 342 chests of tea belonging to British East India Company were thrown from ships in the Boston harbor by American patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians. The American-Spanish War began with the sinking of USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Incidentally, people were told it was sunk by a mine placed underneath this ship, and this is what spurred anti-Spanish sentiment and spurred the United States to enter the war. In 1976, a team of Navy explosive experts re-examined the earlier evidence and concluded that the likeliest cause of the sinking of the Maine was an internal explosion. Many historians now agree that the explosion was most likely a false flag for the purpose of angering the U.S. populace and initiating the war which followed. Cuban politician and former director of the National Library of Euclides Acosta said powerful economic interests were responsible for sinking the Maine. Even the American Civil War had elements of false flag terror. And while it was not started by a direct act of deception, the American Civil War did have plenty of false flags in the more literal sense. Union Naval Commander David Dixon reported to a strange hoax as one of his best ships, the USS Indianola, had ran aground on the Mississippi River and was captured by Confederate forces. As the latter were trying to repair the damaged ship and reafloat her so that the powerful guns could be used back against Porter's remaining fleet, Porter ordered the construction of a giant dummy ship, ironclad, made out of barges and barrels and other metal materials available, fashioned to look like a real warship, even down to logs sticking out of the sides, painted silver to resemble cannons. The huge craft was painted to give it a sinister appearance, and it flew the pirate Jolly Roger flag. It was put on the water and floated downstream. As it silently sailed right past the rebel shore battalions, impervious to their gunfire and not returning any, The news quickly spread. Exaggerated rumors of a mysterious and seemingly indestructible ship quickly spread to the crews working on the Indianola, and in a panic, they halted their salvage efforts, choosing instead to just blow it up and sink it to the bottom, abandoning the wreckage site, thus failing in their chance of refitting the ship. The sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger boat, is what got us into World War One. At the beginning of World War One, Britain was fighting Germany. We had not yet entered the fight. Winston Churchill, as head of the British Admiralty, ordered a study to be done to find out exactly what would happen, how Americans would react if Germany sunk a ship with Americans on board. Once they determined that that event would indeed motivate citizens to join the war, they proceeded to taunt a German U-boat that was on a sensitive escort mission. At that time, Britain had cracked Germany's radio transmissions codes, and they knew the location of all of its warships. At the time, then banker President Woodrow Wilson tried to cover it up and try to have all of the records sealed inside of the treasury. That is one of those things that people say, yeah, Danny, that's a conspiracy theory. But everything I just said had already aired on the Discovery Channel in a documentary titled In Search of the Lusitania. Just Google Room 40. There were 1,962 passengers and crew aboard the Lusitania at the time of sinking. 200 of them were Americans, and 1,198 lost their lives. The government sacrificed its citizens then. Why wouldn't it tomorrow? Decentralize your lives today. Withdraw your consent. And remember, we are sovereign individuals. The event that brought us into World War II, of course, was Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was not a false flag itself, much the same as the Lusitania event. Pearl Harbor was calculated and designed in advance to happen the way it did. In his book, Day of Deceit, The Truth About FDR and Pearl Harbor, Robert Stinnett made public the McCullum Memo, also known as the 8 Action Memo, which was a memorandum dated October 7, 1940, more than a year before the Pearl Harbor attack. The memo, written by Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCullum, who worked directly with the White House, suggested that the United States provoke Japan into committing an overt act of war. The memo laid out 8-point action plan to bring America into the war. The memo also made it apparent to the ruling class that multiple people then in the U.S. Naval Intelligence supported the idea of goading Japan into a preemptive attack on the U.S. McCullum's 5-page memorandum would indeed engineer a situation that would mobilize a reluctant America into joining Britain's struggle against German armed forces then already beginning to overrun Europe. There is no doubt that the Roosevelt administration conspired directly to secretly provoke the Japanese into attacking the United States and to order to bring the United States into war in Europe without generating contempt over broken political promises, as Roosevelt, like many presidents before and after, made campaign promises that the United States would not become entangled into Europe's war. The McCullum Memo has a lot in common with other papers, such as the Oded Yinin Plan and the Project for a New American Century papers, which prior to 9/11 called for a new Pearl Harbor event that would bring America into the New World Order by uniting the West against a common enemy. Continuing, you absolutely cannot understand what today's terrorism is if you do not know about Operation Gladio. Just after World War II, The stay-behind armies, sleeper cells, that got so bored that they started creating their own covert enemies to fight. The West, long before Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda had already started turning state-sponsored international terrorist groups against innocent civilians. Operation Gladio was the code name for a clandestine North American treaty organization stay-behind operation in Italy during the Cold War. The former Italian Prime Minister, an Italian judge, and the former head of Italian counterintelligence admitted that NATO, with the help of the Pentagon and the CIA, carried out terror bombings in Italy and other European countries in the 1950s through the 1980s and blamed communists in order to rally anti-communist support in Europe. As one participant pointed out, in his formerly secret program stated, you had to attack civilians, people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people far removed from any political game. The reason was quite simple. They were supposed to force these people, the Italian public, to turn the state and ask for greater security, so that a state of emergency could be declared, so people would willingly trade part of their freedom for more security. Italy and other European countries, subject to the terror campaign, had joined NATO before the bombings occurred. They also allegedly carried out terror attacks in France, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Greece, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United Kingdom, and several other countries. The CIA stressed to the head of the Italian program that Italy needed to use the program to control what could be internal uprisings. False flag attacks carried pursuant to this program, by way of example only, include the murder of the Turkish Prime Minister in 1960, the bombings in Portugal in 1966, the Pisania Fontana massacre in Italy, terror attacks in Turkey in 1971, the Pententero bombing in Italy in 1972, shootings in Brescia, Italy, and bombings on the Italian train in 1974, the shootings in Istanbul in 1977, the massacre in Madrid in 1977, the induction of an Italian prime minister in 1978, the bombing of Bologna railway station, the shooting of 28 shoppers. These are all done by the Central Intelligence Agency and NATO, targeting innocent people on record. When you people try to debate me if false flags are real, just please revert back to this right here, okay? That was all what's called Gladio A. We are now in what's called Gladio B. And instead of fighting communism, the war is against Islam. I didn't come to this conclusion myself. I was told this by Italian Supreme Court Judge Fernando Impastatismo, whose brother was killed and who presided over some of the most important terrorism cases in Italian history. I met him at a presentation in New York City where he described to me what is known as the political strategy of tension. And he talked about how radical Islamic terrorism is only the newest version of a state-created propaganda campaign of fear. In 1960, American Senator George Smathers suggested that the U.S. launch a false flag attack on Guantanamo Bay, which would give us the excuse to actually fighting a fight and to overthrow Castro. The U.S. admitted by the U.S. government, a recently declassified document showing in 1962 that the American Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on a plan to blow up American warplanes using an elaborate plan involving the switching of airplanes, also to commit terrorist acts on American soil and to blame it on Cubans in order to justify the invasion of Cuba. See the following ABC News report, the official documents, and watch the interview of the former Washington investigative producer for the ABC World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. The U.S. Department of Defense also suggested covertly paying a person in the Castro government to attack the United States. The only area remaining for consideration then would be to bribe one of Castro's subordinate commanders to initiate attack on Guantanamo. So they were trying to pay one of Castro's men to attack America, to use that as justification to attack Cuba. A U.S. congressional committee admitted that part of its co-intelligence program campaign, the FBI had used many provocateurs in the 1950s to the 1970s to carry out violent acts and falsely blame them on their political activists. We're only in the 1970s. We're not even halfway there yet. It's 25 minutes worth of talking. You still not believe that false flags are real. You still not see what's happening. I'm going to keep going. Keep going till my voice is out, guys. Look, the USS Liberty. In 1967, Israel attacked the USS Liberty using unmanned aircraft. The event killed 34 American servicemen. In a signed affidavit released at Capitol Hill News Conference, retired Captain Ward Boston said, Johnson and McNamara told those heading the Navy's inquiry to, quote, conclude that the attack was a case of mistaken identity despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The Israeli government had intended to sink the American ship and blame the attack on its enemy, Egypt. Why is this not in the history books right alongside of Pearl Harbor? The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is what brought us into Vietnam. It was the Pearl Harbor that got us into Vietnam. The outcome was the passage of what's called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution by President Lyndon B. Johnson, which gave the authority to America to assist any Southeast Asian countries whose government was considered to be jeopardized by, quote, communist aggression. The resolution served as Johnson's legal justification for deploying U.S. conventional forces into the commencement of open warfare against North Vietnam. How many people did we lose in Vietnam? A million? Quarter million? A whole lot. For a lie. For something that they said happened that didn't. In 1995, former Defense Secretary McNamara met with former Vietnam's People Army General Vo Nguyen Giap to ask what really happened on August 4th, 1964, in the second Gulf of Tonkin incident. Absolutely nothing, Giap replied. Giap claimed the attack had been imaginary. In 2005, the Internal National Security Administration's historical study was declassified. It concluded that Maddox had engaged the North Vietnamese Navy on August 2nd, but that there were no North Vietnamese vessels present during the incident. Documents and tapes released in the past 7 years, combined with previously undiscovered facts, made it clear, undeniable, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was completely fabricated by the United States government and used the American media system to project to the public that a ship was attacked and sunk in the Gulf of Tonkin. And it absolutely, positively never happened, guys. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against the Cuban government. We've touched on it a few times already tonight. That originated within the U.S. Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States government in 1962. The proposals called for a central intelligence agency of the U.S. government operatives to commit acts of terrorism against American civilians, military targets, blaming it on the Cuban government and using it to justify a war against Cuba. The plans detailed in the document included the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, the sinking of boats of Cuban refugees in the high seas, hijacking of planes, blowing up a U.S. ship, and orchestrating violent terrorism in U.S. cities. Their proposals were supposedly rejected by the John F. Kennedy administration prior to his assassination. At the time, the proposal, communists led by Fidel Castro, had recently taken power in Cuba. Operation proposed creating public support for war against Cuba by claiming it for terrorist attacks that would actually be perpetrated by the United States government. To this end, Operation Northwoods proposals recommended hijackings and bombings, followed by the introduction of phony evidence that would implicate the Cuban government, it stated. The desired result from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash of irresponsible government of Cuba, and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. To develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. Several other proposals were included into Operation Northwoods, including real or simulated actions against various United States military or civilian targets. The operation recommended using a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area or in other Florida cities or even in Washington, D.C. itself. One thing they planned on doing was shooting down a fake commuter jet and having mock funerals on television of fake victims. Does that sound familiar, guys? This is the 1960s. They were already doing this, man. Pay attention. In 1984, this is getting into the war on Gaddafi, the war in the Middle East. This is where it starts getting into that realm. The Oded Yanan plan, the Greater Esra Israel. In 1984, Mossad planted a radio transmitter in Gaddafi's compound in Libya, which broadcast fake terrorist transmissions that were recorded by Mossad in order to frame Gaddafi as a terrorist supporter. Ronald Reagan began bombing Libya immediately thereafter. Shortly after, in 1986, the CIA bombed a Berlin disco in which 2 American servicemen died. The CIA spread the idea that the Libyans intend to plant another bomb in Berlin, but this was then a false flag operation. In 1986, the CIA bombed a Berlin disco in which 2 American servicemen died. The CIA then spread the idea that the Libyans intended to place another bomb in Berlin, and this was a false flag operation designed to turn public perception against Libya in Europe at the time. In 1990, what's become known as the Naraya incident, the 15-year-old girl, the Naraya testimony is the story of a 15-year-old girl by the name of Naraya. She was the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, and she testified before the Congressional Human Rights Committee. She said that she had witnessed Iraqi soldiers take babies out of incubators in a Kuwaiti hospital, steal the incubators, and leave the babies on the floor to die. And her emotional story was initially collaborated by Amnesty International. An ABC report found that patients, including premature babies, did die when many of Kuwaiti's nurses and doctors fled. But the whole story was a lie that George Bush Sr. and the propagandists of his period used to justify military intervention in the Gulf War. It seems to be the same routine over and over, and it works every time. In the 1990s, there are multiple false flags, including the Oklahoma City bombing and the original World Trade Center bombing. In early 2005, UPI, the United Press Institute International, found some of the first conclusive evidence that Mossad and the CIA were indeed supporting rebels in Iraq. U.S. intelligence officers report that some of the insurgents in Iraq are using recent model Beretta O2 pistols that have no serial numbers. These numbers have not been removed. The guns came off a production line with no number. Analysts suggest the lack of serial numbers indicate that the weapons were intended for intelligence operations or terrorist cells with substantial government backing. And analysts speculate that these guns are probably from either Mossad or the CIA. Analysts speculate that agent provocateurs may be using the untraceable weapon, even as U.S. authorities use insurgents' attacks against civilians as evidence of the legitimacy of the resistance. Gladio B is today's Islamic boogeyman. FBI whistleblower Chabelle Edmonds revealed Operation Gladio B as an FBI code name adopted in 1997 for ongoing relations between the U.S. intelligence, the Pentagon, and then Al-Qaeda. This operation was to be the same as Gladio, continues to carry out false flags attacks, especially in Europe as part of an ongoing multinational strategy of tension. The objective of Gladio B, as projecting U.S. power and influence to access previously untapped resources and to set up geostrategic locations in the Middle East to counter a growing Russia and Chinese power. Furthermore, the Gladio B is the epitome of shadow government's black operations, so it has the added objectives of expanding the scope of lucrative criminal activities, particularly illegal arms and drugs trafficking. I would add human trafficking too. Edmonds revealed that senior U.S. intelligence agents were regularly meeting with Alim al-Zawahiri, then leader of Al-Qaeda, at the U.S. Embassy in Azerbaijan and Baku starting in 1997 and continuing up to the 9/11 attacks. They were also meeting members of the bin Laden family, including Osama bin Laden and other mujahideen who were transported by NATO aircraft into Central Asia and the Balkans to participate in other false flag and destabilization operations. I'm not alone in these ideas. People like author Gernard O'Coleman, former Marine Ken O'Keefe, and former intelligence officer Robert David Steele all agree that today's terrorism are false flag events manufactured by the clandestine deep state community in order to achieve political goals and to justify interventionism in foreign nations. Hermann Göring, the Nazi leader, said, "Why, of course the people don't want war. But after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy. And it's always a simpler matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to a danger. It works the same in every country. The easiest way to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will then clamor for such laws if their personal security is threatened." Joseph Stalin. Terrorist attacks worldwide. Did you know that there were no terrorist attacks in Iraq prior to 2013, and there were no terrorist attacks in the world after World War II up until, I think, 1980, 1989, somewhere in that area?